Donald Trump is running out of time to secure an appeal bond for his civil fraud case. The former president has until Monday to come up with the cash for the $464 million judgment with interest. If he doesn't, New York Attorney General Letitia James could start seizing his assets. His lawyers on Monday asked an appeals court to stop the collection proceedings because they have not found a bond company that is willing to back Trump. According to his lawyers, the former president would actually need to put up nearly $557 million worth of collateral. As the New York Times points out, most of Trump's wealth is tied to his real estate assets, which bond companies will not accept as collateral. Yesterday, senior Fox Business correspondent Charlie Gasparino explained why Trump's billionaire friends have yet to help him out.
What is behind their reluctance?
Well, it's as of now, so
right.
let's see.
I mean, are they afraid that they might not see it anytime soon? The money, if he even succeeds on appeal, what's
yeah? I mean, that's one thing. I mean, I think I don't want to, I don't want to speak for Bernie Marcus, that's for sure. But just generally, Donald doesn't have a great record at paying back banks over the years, and Donald Trump. So you can sort of surmise from that what you will.
Joining us now, MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos, also with us, NBC News legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Andrew Weissmann. He is co-author of the new book on the Trump indictments. Question for you both. Andrew, I'll start with you. I would think a judgment in a civil trial finding the defendant liable means the consequences that he has to pay with his own money. That's pay the consequence. Are there rules around who pays these judgments, or can anyone jump in and bail him out, and inevitably is Trump going to get that, some political supporter perhaps could help him?
So anybody can jump in, to answer your question.
Really?
There's no restriction on getting a friend. It can be an American. It can be somebody overseas. Anybody can come in. But so far, that hasn't happened. I think one thing that we have learned is Donald Trump simply, in spite of what he has been telling the public, does not have the money. His story is that he does not have liquid assets. He doesn't have cash to put up to satisfy the bond. And the bond, by the way, is typical. That's a standard thing. And his claim that, well, he can't do that because all of his real assets are in real estate, which is illiquid, that doesn't really make any sense. If he really had real estate with equity in it, he would do what many, many homeowners do, which is get a mortgage. And he can use that money to put up the bond. So he also clearly does not have equity in either cash or in the real estate to put up the amount of money. So I think on Monday, absent the court lowering the amount or somehow staying the bond requirement, we're going to be seeing Tish James seizing assets, and she will find out everything.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing on seizing assets. Andrew's exactly right. But the challenge here is actually what that looks like. And this is why ordinarily plaintiffs' attorneys and private firms aren't really big fans of being able to seize assets after a judgment like this. They'd much rather go after a company or an individual who's covered by an insurance policy that usually has liquid available to pay a judgment. Most plaintiffs' attorneys are not that interested in the trouble of seizing assets. It's not fun. It's not easy. I imagine Donald Trump has protected himself with layers and layers of protection that we haven't even seen yet, that Tish James may not even know about. So it's not going to be an easy process. It won't be as simple as just freezing assets or walking in with a giant padlock in front of one of the Trump buildings and getting that money within a week. It's going to take some time. Most plaintiffs' attorneys are not really that interested in executing judgment. But if you're Tish James and you're a government agency, then those are the kinds of things you're not too worried about.
Andrew, what are the chances, though, he doesn't have someone come up with the money for him and get away with this and everything else he seems to be getting away with? Seems to be. I know the legal process moves slowly and they don't listen to people like us. But Jared Kushner, walked away from Saudi Arabia with $2 billion. He's buying land in Eastern European countries and building. I mean, there's just, I think, a slight chance he has access to the money.
Well, that is everyone's national security concern, is that there will be somebody, just hypothetically, like an Elon Musk here in the United States, or sort of in a maybe equally or more scary way, somebody like an MBS or a Russian oligarch who's going to think this is a very good investment, because if he becomes president, there will be 464 million reasons why Donald Trump will favor that person in terms of his policies. So I agree with you. I think that his, best strategy, his best exit strategy, so that there isn't the seizure of assets and also the disclosure of just how fragile his empire is, to keep that all under wraps, his best strategy is to find that third party, even if it is a foreigner, who will loan him the money.
Okay, we need to continue this conversation because I want to understand more about how that's possible.